The Colosseum wasn't just built, it was engineered with secrets we still can't fully recreate today. Rising from the heart of ancient Rome, it was more than an amphitheater. It was a declaration of power, a statement of permanence, and a technological riddle that continues to puzzle engineers and historians. At first glance, the Colosseum looks like a ruin, weathered by centuries of earthquakes, fires, and looting. Yet its core structure still stands, a survivor from an age long gone. And the deeper you look, the more its mysteries reveal themselves, mysteries so profound that even with all our modern machines, materials, and computing power, we struggle to reproduce what the Romans achieved with simple tools and human labor. One of the most striking puzzles lies in the very bones of the structure, Roman concrete. Unlike the concrete we use today, which weakens, cracks, and requires constant repair, Roman concrete somehow grew stronger with age. It healed itself, closing tiny cracks before they spread. This meant that the Colosseum and other Roman marvels didn't just resist time, they embraced it. Saltwater, the great destroyer of modern construction, made Roman concrete more durable. 2,000 years later, modern scientists are still trying to decode its chemistry. Why did their concrete last millennia while ours struggles to last a century? The brilliance of the Colosseum wasn't only hidden in its materials. Its design was just as extraordinary. The amphitheater could hold 50,000 people, sometimes even more, yet every one of them could find their seat and leave the arena in minutes. In an age when fire safety regulations, crowd management science, and modern architecture did not exist, Roman engineers somehow built a structure that outperforms many of today's stadiums. The secret lay in the arches, the vaults, and a system of corridors and staircases that funneled the crowds with astonishing efficiency. The Romans called them vomitoria, passages designed to spew people out quickly into the city streets. To stand in the Colosseum was to stand in the most advanced architectural machine of its time. And yet, there is a darker question that lingers behind its beauty: why can't we recreate it today? With all our advanced equipment, why would rebuilding the Colosseum be nearly impossible? The answer is not just about technology, but about vision. The Romans built with eternity in mind. They weren't concerned with quarterly profits, quick fixes, or temporary solutions. They quarried massive blocks of travertine stone, transported them across rivers and roads, and locked them together with bronze clamps filled with molten lead. They shaped arches so perfectly that gravity itself held them firm. They layered volcanic ash into their concrete to create material that would only grow stronger in time. They invested in permanence, something our modern world rarely values. The Colosseum was more than a stadium, it was a promise. A promise that Rome would endure, that its power would outlast the rise and fall of kings, and that the empire's name would be etched into stone for eternity. That promise still whispers through the ruins today. Every broken arch, every scar left by time, reminds us that this structure was not the product of chance or luck. It was deliberate, meticulous, and calculated. By the end of this journey, you will see how this extraordinary monument was created step by step. You will learn why Roman builders drained a lake to lay its foundation, how they devised an underground labyrinth to house animals and gladiators, and how a canopy as large as a modern football field once shaded the roaring crowds. You will see why its materials remain unmatched, why its systems were centuries ahead of their time, and why even today we cannot truly replicate it. The Colosseum is not just a ruin. It is a challenge. A challenge thrown across the ages, daring us to match the ambition, the precision, and the vision of a civilization that built for forever. And as we explore how the Romans achieved the impossible, one truth will become clear: the Colosseum was never just built. It was engineered as a message to the future, and that message still echoes, unbroken, after 2,000 years. The Colosseum began with destruction. To raise the empire's greatest monument, the Romans first erased a symbol of tyranny. Emperor Nero had claimed the heart of Rome for himself, flooding an area to create a shimmering artificial lake within the gardens of his golden house. To the people, it was an insult. Land that should have belonged to Rome was consumed by one man's vanity. When Nero fell, his successors sought to wipe away the stain of his reign. They drained his private lake and declared that in its place, a gift to the Roman people would rise, an amphitheater larger and stronger than any the world had seen. But as the water receded, a new danger appeared. Beneath the lakebed lay soft, unstable soil, unfit for a structure that would weigh hundreds of thousands of tons. Any ordinary building would sink, crack, and collapse under its own mass. Yet failure was not an option. To falter here would mean more than wasted stone, it would mean the collapse of Rome's promise to its people. Roman engineers answered with audacity. They dug a massive trench, not a shallow pit, but a depression 13 meters deep and more than 200 meters across. Into this void they drove countless oak piles, hammered into the earth until they formed a wooden lattice. These timbers, buried beneath layers of clay, became the skeleton of the foundation. Their purpose was simple but vital: to stabilize the swampy ground and prevent the soil from shifting under the weight that was soon to come. When the lattice was complete, the Romans poured their secret weapon, concrete unlike any the world had ever seen. This was no weak mixture of sand and lime. It was volcanic concrete, infused with ash from Italy's restless earth. They poured it in layers, tamped it down, and poured again, until it formed a slab as thick as a 4-story building. In some places, this foundation reached 12 meters in depth. It was not just a base, it was an artificial bedrock, stronger than the soil beneath it and resistant even to the shaking of earthquakes. Modern engineers who study this work say the Romans did not simply build on the ground, they built the ground itself. They created geology where none existed, manufacturing stability with science centuries ahead of its time. This decision ensured that while temples crumbled, while palaces burned, and while entire neighborhoods shifted under tremors, the Colosseum remained. The foundation was more than an engineering solution, it was a statement of intent. Rome would not build something temporary, something that leaned or cracked as decades passed. They would raise a monument that laughed at time. And they began by conquering the very earth on which it stood. If the Romans could build something that still stands after 2,000 years, the least you can do is click subscribe to honor their genius. Or do you really think binge-watching cat videos is more important than history? If the foundation was the Colosseum's bones, its flesh was a material the modern world still struggles to fully comprehend: Roman concrete. To most people, concrete is unremarkable, a mixture poured, hardened, and destined to crumble over time. But in the hands of the Romans, it became something more. It became alive. The formula was deceptively simple: lime, water, sand, and volcanic ash. Yet the combination created a substance that defied nature itself. The volcanic ash was the secret. It came from violent eruptions, the kind that scarred the Italian landscape and buried entire cities. Mixed into the concrete, this ash reacted with the lime in ways that are still difficult for scientists to replicate. Instead of weakening, the concrete hardened with time. Where modern structures rot and fracture, Roman concrete healed its wounds. The process was hidden in the heat. Roman builders practiced what we now call hot mixing. Rather than slaking lime with water before adding it, they cast unslaked lime directly into the mixture. The result was a violent reaction, releasing heat so intense it created pockets of crystallized lime within the hardened concrete. For centuries, these inclusions were thought to be flaws, signs of rushed or sloppy work. But when cracks appeared in the Colosseum, water seeped inside and touched these inclusions. They dissolved, formed new minerals, and sealed the cracks shut. The material was not static. It adapted. It fought back. It repaired itself. This was why Roman aqueducts still channel water. This was why Roman ports still stand against waves and salt. And this was why the Colosseum, though scarred by centuries, still towers in Rome. The very elements that destroy our modern concrete, rain, salt, and time, only made theirs stronger. Consider the difference. Our concrete is a coffin. Once cracks appear, they spread, they weaken, and they destroy. Repairs are temporary. Maintenance is endless. But Roman concrete was a body that healed. It did not surrender to age. It grew harder, stronger, more resilient, as if it had sworn loyalty to eternity itself. This was no accident. Roman engineers understood patience. They did not build for their lifetimes. They built for generations unborn, for centuries they would never see. They knew the games and spectacles of their day would fade, but the stone would remain, whispering the greatness of Rome. Their philosophy was not efficiency, but permanence. Roman concrete was more than a material. It was a philosophy of time itself. A reminder that greatness is not measured in what serves the moment, but in what endures. Romans built to last millennia. Modern builders cut corners. Which one do you want to be? Subscribe now, or explain in the comments why short-term thinking is better. Above the living concrete rose a forest of arches, the defining skeleton of the Colosseum. To the Romans, arches were not decoration, they were the language of power written in stone. 3 monumental tiers circled the amphitheater, each one resting upon the strength of the one below it. Their secret lay in the keystone, a single wedge-shaped stone at the top of every arch. It carried the crushing weight of thousands of tons, but instead of collapsing under the pressure, it redirected the force outward, pressing each block tighter into place. What should have been weakness became strength. What should have fallen apart became indestructible. This system gave the Colosseum an eerie duality. From afar it looked light, almost graceful, its endless rows of arches resembling a crown of open windows. But beneath the beauty was cold calculation. Those arches held the mass of travertine, tough and concrete in perfect balance, creating a structure that seemed to defy gravity. Unlike the heavy walls of other ancient buildings, the Colosseum was a breathing organism, its bones hollow yet unbreakable. Inside, the brilliance deepened. Beneath the seats ran vaulted passageways, Roman concrete ribs supporting the vast shell of the arena. These vaults were not merely structural. They were functional corridors, staircases, and chambers, funneling humanity through the Colosseum's veins. 50,000 people could pour into the amphitheater, take their seats, and empty out again in a matter of minutes. In an age where cities routinely burned from panicked crowds trapped in narrow exits, the Colosseum stood as a masterpiece of crowd control. Even today, with all our sensors, cameras, and turnstiles, most modern stadiums struggle to match that efficiency. But these arches were more than an engineering triumph. They were symbols. To the Romans, strength was never in brute mass. It was in design. In the careful distribution of weight. In the manipulation of natural laws until they bent to the will of empire. The Colosseum's arches whispered this philosophy, that Rome's power was not clumsy or fragile, but disciplined, ordered, and eternal. Each keystone was a lesson, that even the heaviest burdens could be borne, if shaped and placed with intelligence. The Colosseum skeleton endures because it was never just a building. It was a philosophy carved into stone. A belief that order conquers chaos, that structure defeats collapse, and that Rome's vision could not be broken even by time. This channel builds knowledge like Rome built arches, strong, unshakable, timeless. If you won't subscribe, at least leave a comment admitting you'd rather let history collapse. The Colosseum was not raised by stone and concrete alone. It was built on logistics, the quiet empire of roads, tools, and human bodies that made such a colossal dream possible. Behind the arches and the sweeping tiers lay an operation so vast it resembled a military campaign. And in many ways, it was. Over 100,000 cubic meters of stone had to be gathered, cut, and delivered. Travertine was quarried at Tivoli, nearly 20 miles from the city, where men hacked at the hillsides until the earth surrendered its limestone bones. Each block weighed tons, yet they were hauled with relentless precision. Special roads were laid to carry the weight, their surfaces scarred by the grooves of ox-drawn carts straining under the burden. At the Anjin River, the blocks were loaded onto barges, floating down to the Tiber, where the current delivered them into the heart of Rome. At the site, the work did not slow. Cranes, pulleys, and winches rose like skeletal arms over the foundations, operated by men and animals in endless shifts. Water-powered lifts hauled materials higher and higher as the tiers climbed skyward. Every rope strained with weight. Every wheel screamed under friction. It was not quiet construction, it was a symphony of groans, shouts, and grinding stone. The workforce itself was a reflection of empire. Soldiers who once fought wars now labored here, their discipline repurposed from battlefield to building site. Slaves, captured from conquered lands, bent their bodies until their spines cracked under loads. Artisans shaped blocks with chisels and hammers, their skill ensuring that each stone fit like a tooth into a jaw. Engineers, architects, and foremen directed the chaos, ensuring every task moved in rhythm. It was not an age of safety. Men fell from scaffolds. Limbs snapped beneath stone. Death was as present on the building site as it was in the arena. But Rome pressed forward. In just 8 years, the amphitheater rose to completion. 8 years to create a structure the modern world would struggle to match in decades. The Colosseum's speed was not luck, it was discipline, organization, and a merciless will. Every quarry, every road, every crane became part of the same machine. And that machine was Rome itself, an empire that consumed bodies, resources, and landscapes to stamp its permanence into the earth. The Romans had the courage to move mountains. You don't even have the courage to hit subscribe? If that's you, say so in the comments. Every empire leaves behind ruins, but the Colosseum was never meant to be fragile. Its endurance rests on the careful choice of materials, stones and metals that together created not just strength, but resilience. The outer shell gleamed with travertine, a pale limestone quarried from Tivoli. It was strong enough to bear crushing weight, yet elegant enough to serve as Rome's architectural face. These blocks, fitted with surgical precision, gave the Colosseum its monumental presence. Behind them, lighter tough stone filled the inner walls and arches. Tough was volcanic, porous, and easier to shape, reducing the structure's weight while preserving its strength. Bricks and Roman concrete knit these layers together, a hidden skeleton binding stone to stone. But the genius lay not only in what they chose, but how they connected it. Blocks were joined by bronze clamps sealed with molten lead. This strange marriage of stone and metal gave the Colosseum a flexibility most ancient structures lacked. When the ground shook with earthquakes, the joints absorbed the violence. The walls shifted but did not collapse. It was a silent insurance policy against disaster. In time, however, the Colosseum was betrayed not by nature but by man. Marble that once covered the seats, the corridors, and the statues was pried away and carted off to adorn Renaissance palaces and churches. Bronze clamps were ripped out, melted, and reforged into weapons and bells. Even the Basilica of St. Peter, the jewel of Christendom, carries the stolen bones of Rome's amphitheater. Yet what remains refuses to fall. Stripped of its marble skin, robbed of its bronze veins, the Colosseum still endures. Its survival is not an accident but a testament to the brilliance of its makers. They built a monument strong enough to survive not only the ravages of time, but the greed of centuries. Even in ruin, it commands reverence. Even broken, it cannot be erased. Beneath the roar of the Colosseum's crowds, another kind of marvel whispered through stone channels and hidden pipes, water, mastered and bent to the will of empire. The Romans were not content to build walls of strength, they sought to command the very element that gave life and destruction. In the Colosseum, this command became spectacle. Fed by Rome's aqueducts, the amphitheater had its own intricate veins, carrying fresh water into fountains for drinking, into latrines for sanitation, and into underground reservoirs that sustained the endless tide of games. Tens of thousands of spectators could gather in the blistering sun, yet find relief at the touch of a fountain. In a city where clean water marked civilization itself, the Colosseum stood as a public reminder that Rome did not simply conquer people, it conquered thirst, filth, and disease. But water was not only for comfort. It was for wonder. Ancient sources tell of the arena floor being transformed into a sea, deep enough to stage mock naval battles. Imagine the sight, the wooden planks removed, the channels opened, and the arena filling with rushing water until small ships floated in the heart of Rome. Gladiators played sailors, chained men became oarsmen, and staged battles unfolded as if the Tiber itself had been captured and forced to serve entertainment. Whether these performances were common or rare, the very possibility shows the reach of Roman engineering. Such spectacles required precision. Engineers had to calculate how quickly the water would rise, how long the arena could hold it, and how swiftly it could be drained to prepare for the next bloodsport. Gravity, sluices, and hidden drains beneath the amphitheater worked in brutal harmony. What to others was chaos, the uncontrollable force of flooding, was, to Rome, choreography. Yet water was more than a tool. It was a symbol. In the Mediterranean world, water meant survival, power, and empire. To command it so completely was to display dominance over nature itself. The fountains that gushed for the crowds were not simply gifts of refreshment. They were proof that Rome's grasp extended into the unseen currents beneath the earth. Even in the midst of carnage, water flowed in ordered channels, as though the empire itself dictated the pulse of nature. Rome could flood an arena and drain it in hours. Yet some people can't take 1 second to subscribe. If that's you, I dare you to explain why in the comments. Above the blood and the dust of the arena stretched a marvel few today can even imagine, the velarium, a canopy of unimaginable scale that turned the stone amphitheater into a living ship of shadows. It was not a roof in the way we understand it, but a sail, vast sheets of linen drawn across the open sky, anchored to masts that rose from the rim of the Colosseum like the spars of a colossal vessel. When the Roman sun scorched down on 50,000 bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, the velarium unfurled. Ropes thick as a man's arm were pulled by sailors, not laborers but veterans of the Roman fleet, men trained to manage the rigging of warships. They were stationed at the amphitheater for this very task, their naval discipline repurposed from sea to stone. With coordinated precision, they drew the canvas wide, section by section, until the crowd sat in cool shadow while breezes whispered through the gaps. This was more than comfort. It was control. By shading the masses, Rome ensured their endurance through spectacles that could last an entire day. The velarium was natural air conditioning centuries before the word existed, manipulating wind currents to create a refreshing draft that turned searing heat into bearable air. To the crowd, it felt like a gift. To Rome, it was another reminder, even the sky itself could be commanded in service of empire. The sight of the velarium being drawn was a spectacle of its own, a slow unfurling that transformed the Colosseum from bare stone into a living organism breathing beneath a canopy of sails. And though the fabric has long rotted away, the sockets for the masts remain, carved into the stone, silent proof that the Romans had mastered not only earth and water, but also the heavens above their people. With all our machines, all our science, and all our resources, we should be able to rebuild the Colosseum with ease. And yet, we cannot. Not because we lack power, but because we have lost something the Romans possessed, both in material and in mind. Our concrete, the backbone of the modern world, is fragile compared to theirs. It cracks, it crumbles, and it must be repaired again and again. Bridges collapse, buildings require endless maintenance, and structures planned today are often designed to last decades, not centuries. The Romans poured concrete that grew stronger with every passing year. We pour concrete that begins to decay the moment it dries. That difference alone makes the Colosseum untouchable. Then comes the question of labor. The Colosseum rose in only 8 years because Rome commanded an army of workers, slaves captured from conquered lands, prisoners of war, soldiers repurposed into laborers. Their lives were consumed by the project, and their suffering left no delay in the schedule. Today, every project is bound by safety laws, wages, and human rights. The very cruelty that Rome relied upon is what modern civilization rejects. We could not build with such disregard for cost or consequence, and in truth, we should not. But it is the very absence of this brutal system that makes a replica impossible. Materials too have changed. Travertine stone, quarried in unimaginable quantities, would today cost a fortune. Marble, once stripped from Greece and ferried into Rome, is now prized as luxury, not mass construction. Even the bronze clamps and lead joints would be prohibitively expensive on a modern scale. What the Romans gathered as empire's spoils, we would pay for in sums that no government or private fund would ever justify. And even if we gathered the stone, even if we mixed our weaker concrete, even if we summoned modern cranes to hoist each block into place, the project would collapse under the weight of bureaucracy. Safety inspections, environmental reviews, political arguments, and budget restraints would stretch the timeline into decades, perhaps longer than a lifetime. The Colosseum was not born from compromise, it was born from command. Rome ordered, and Rome built. The truth is clear. We cannot recreate the Colosseum because it was never just engineering. It was a worldview. The Romans built with the arrogance of eternity in mind. They did not seek convenience, but permanence. They did not ask how quickly or cheaply something could be done. They asked how long it would last after they were gone. And they answered with stone, concrete, and vision so unyielding that their monument still stands while our own crumble within decades. The Colosseum is beyond replication not because we lack machines, but because we lack the same hunger to outlast time itself. It was not just a building, it was a philosophy written in arches and concrete. Rome built for eternity. We build for tomorrow. The Colosseum is more than a ruin, it is Rome's unbroken shadow. For nearly 2,000 years it has endured storms, earthquakes, and fires that reduced entire districts of the city to ash. It has survived looting, its marble ripped away to feed palaces and churches, its bronze veins stolen and reforged into weapons. It has been scarred, stripped, and hollowed, yet it still stands, towering over Rome like a survivor who refuses to fall. Its endurance is not chance, it is proof of what happens when vision, discipline, and engineering converge with the will to build forever. The Romans chose their materials with precision, quarried their stone from the hills around them, poured concrete that healed itself, and raised arches that turned weight into strength. Every decision was measured not for speed, but for permanence. In that choice lies a lesson for our own time, that greatness is not built in haste, and that true monuments are not meant to serve the moment but to speak across generations. What the Colosseum whispers is not just the glory of Rome, but a warning to us. We build towers of glass and steel that gleam for a few decades before they are torn down. We pour concrete that crumbles with the passing years. We build for ourselves, but not for those who will follow. The Romans built for eternity, and eternity still answers them. Rome built for eternity, and the Colosseum still whispers across 2,000 years, we may conquer time, but time can never conquer us. This was disturbing tale. If you felt the weight of history pressing through the stones of the Colosseum, subscribe now. And if you refuse, go to the comments and tell us why, because ignoring history is the surest way to be forgotten by it.